September 3, 2025. At 0430 hours Moscow time, the unthinkable became reality. Russian forces launched Operation Northern Storm, a coordinated invasion of all three Baltic states simultaneously. 80,000 Russian troops, 1,200 main battle tanks, and 400 aircraft crossed into Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in what Moscow called a special military operation to protect ethnic Russian populations. But within 37 minutes of the first border crossing, NATO's Article 5 was invoked for only the second time in the alliance's history. What followed was not the swift victory Putin had envisioned, but the largest military mobilization in Europe since World War II. 500,000 NATO troops, 2,000 aircraft, and the combined naval power of 30 nations would converge on the Baltic region in less than 72 hours. The Russian bear had awakened a sleeping giant, and the response would reshape the global balance of power forever. How did NATO respond so quickly? What was Russia's fatal miscalculation? Join me in discovering the truth behind the 72 hours that changed Europe forever. September 3, 2025, 0430 hours. Under cover of darkness, the largest Russian military operation since the invasion of Ukraine began with devastating precision. 3 separate army groups, each numbering over 25,000 troops, crossed simultaneously into the Baltic states at predetermined breach points that had been planned for months. The northern group, spearheaded by the 1st Guards Tank Army, smashed through Estonian defenses near Narva with 400 T-90M Pro-Riv main battle tanks and 200 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles. Their objective: capture Tallinn within 18 hours and secure the strategic port facilities before NATO reinforcements could arrive. The central group, led by the 20th Combined Arms Army, struck into Latvia through the Daugavpils corridor with 350 tanks and 15,000 mechanized infantry. Their mission was to bisect the country and capture Riga's international airport, cutting off NATO's primary reinforcement route. The southern group, consisting of the 11th Army Corps and Kaliningrad-based forces, launched a pincer movement into Lithuania from both the east and west. With 450 armored vehicles and close air support from 120 Su-34 fighter bombers, they aimed to capture Vilnius and link up with Kaliningrad forces within 24 hours. Supporting this massive ground offensive were 400 aircraft from the Russian aerospace forces, including 2 95 strategic bombers, launching Kh-101 cruise missiles at NATO command centers, Su-57 stealth fighters providing air superiority, and Ka-52 attack helicopters decimating defensive positions. The initial assault was devastating. Estonian forces, numbering just 6,400 active personnel, were overwhelmed at multiple crossing points. Latvian defenders, with only 5,500 troops, found themselves fighting a two-front war as Russian forces advanced from both Pskov and Belarus. Lithuania's 20,000-strong military faced the largest assault, with Russian forces attacking from 3 directions simultaneously. If you were NATO's supreme allied commander, would you respond immediately or wait to assess the full scope of the invasion? Tell me in the comments. 0507 hours. Just 37 minutes after the first Russian tank crossed into Estonia, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg received the emergency call that would change history. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, speaking from a secure bunker beneath Tallinn, delivered the words that every NATO leader had hoped never to hear. "We are under attack. We invoke Article 5. Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty is NATO's collective defense clause. An attack on one member is considered an attack on all." It had been invoked only once before, following the September 11th attacks, but never in response to a conventional military invasion by a nuclear power. Within minutes, the NATO crisis response system activated. Emergency sessions convened simultaneously in Washington, London, Paris, Berlin, and 26 other capitals. The North Atlantic Council, NATO's principal political decision-making body, held an emergency virtual meeting at 0530 hours, just 1 hour after the invasion began. President Trump's response was immediate and unequivocal. "The United States stands with our Baltic allies. An attack on Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania is an attack on America. We will respond with the full force of the NATO alliance." By 0600 hours, NATO's graduated response plan was in motion. Phase 1, Immediate deployment of rapid reaction forces already stationed in Eastern Europe. Phase 2. Mobilization of the NATO response forces, 40,000 troops. Phase 3. Full-scale deployment of alliance military assets, a force that would ultimately number over 500,000 personnel. The speed of NATO's response caught Russian planners completely off guard. Intelligence intercepts later revealed that Moscow had expected at least 48 to 72 hours of political deliberation before any military response. Instead, NATO forces were moving within the first hour. Before you discover NATO's devastating response, please support us by liking and subscribing to the channel. 0630 hours. The first NATO forces to respond weren't American or British, but Polish and German units already stationed in the Baltics as part of NATO's enhanced forward presence. The Polish-led battle group in Estonia, consisting of 1,200 troops with Leopard 2 A6 tanks and Puma infantry fighting vehicles, immediately engaged Russian forces near Tapa. The German-led battle group in Lithuania, reinforced by Dutch and Norwegian units, established defensive positions around Rukla and began coordinating with Lithuanian forces for a fighting withdrawal toward prepared positions. The Canadian-led battle group in Latvia, supported by Spanish and Italian troops, moved to defend the strategic Daugava River crossings. But these 4,000 NATO troops were just the beginning. At 0645 hours, the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Liberty, North Carolina, received deployment orders. Within 2 hours, the first C-17 Globemaster III transport aircraft were airborne, carrying 3,500 paratroopers toward Europe in the largest emergency deployment since the Berlin crisis. Simultaneously, the USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, operating in the North Sea, received orders to proceed at maximum speed toward the Baltic approaches. The strike group's 90 aircraft, including FA-18EF Super Hornets and EA-18G Growlers, would provide crucial air support once they reached operational range. 0700 hours. The first major engagement occurred near Narva, Estonia, where Russian T-90M tanks encountered Polish Leopard 2 A6s in a fierce armor battle. The Polish tanks, equipped with advanced fire control systems and depleted uranium ammunition, proved superior in the initial exchanges, destroying 12 Russian tanks while losing only 3 of their own. But the numbers were overwhelming. For every NATO tank, the Russians had deployed 5. For every NATO soldier, there were 4 Russian troops. The mathematics of warfare were brutally simple. Without massive reinforcements, the Baltic states would fall within days. 0800 hours. At Ramstein Air Base, Germany, the largest military airlift operation since the Berlin airlift began. Every available C-17, C-5M Galaxy, and KC-135 Stratotanker was pressed into service as the United States began moving the 1st Armored Division from Fort Bliss, Texas, to Eastern Europe. The scale was staggering: 15,000 soldiers, 300 M1A2 Abrams tanks, 200 M2 Bradley fighting vehicles, and 150 M109A7 self-propelled howitzers would be transported 5,000 miles in less than 72 hours. The operation required 400 cargo flights and consumed 50 million gallons of jet fuel. At the same time, the 173rd Airborne Brigade, already stationed in Italy, received orders for immediate combat deployment. Their mission: conduct airborne assaults behind Russian lines to disrupt supply routes and communications. It would be the largest combat parachute drop since World War II. 0830 hours. The first American airstrikes began as B-52H Stratofortresses, launched from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, reached their targets. Flying a 16-hour mission with multiple aerial refuelings, the bombers unleashed 84 AGM-158J ASSM cruise missiles against Russian command centers, supply depots, and air defense sites. Each JSSM, costing $1.4 million, carried a 1,000-pound warhead with precision guidance accurate to within 3 meters. The simultaneous strikes on 84 targets across the invasion zone created chaos in Russian command structures and severely degraded their air defense network. Supporting the bomber strikes were F-22A Raptors from the 1st Fighter Wing, which had deployed to RAF Lakenheath, England, just hours earlier. the stealth fighters swept Russian aircraft from the skies, shooting down 18 Su-34 fighter bombers and 12 Su-35S air superiority fighters in the first day of combat, 900 hours. Across Europe, NATO's collective defense mechanism demonstrated its true power. The German Bundeswehr activated its largest military mobilization since reunification, deploying the entire 10th Panzer Division, 15,000 troops with 200 Leopard 2A7 tanks toward Poland within 12 hours. France responded with characteristic speed and efficiency. The 2nd Armored Brigade, equipped with Leclerc main battle tanks and Caesar self-propelled howitzers, began moving from Champagne toward the Baltic region. French Rafale fighters from the Armée de l'Air launched from bases across France, establishing air superiority over the North Sea approaches. The United Kingdom's response was equally swift. The Queen Elizabeth Carrier Strike Group, operating in the Norwegian Sea, turned southeast toward the Baltic. The carrier's 24 F-35B Lightning II fighters would provide crucial close air support once they reached operational range. Additionally, the British Army's 3rd Division began emergency deployment from Salisbury Plain, bringing 18,000 troops and 150 Challenger 3 tanks to the fight. Even smaller NATO members contributed significantly. The Netherlands deployed its entire 13th Light Brigade, while Denmark committed its Jutland Mechanized Battalion. Norway, despite not being directly threatened, sent its Telemark Battalion and provided crucial intelligence from its advanced radar stations. 1,000 hours. The first major NATO counterattack began as Polish forces, reinforced by arriving German units, launched Operation Baltic Shield. 200 Leopard 2 tanks, supported by 150 self-propelled artillery pieces, struck Russian forces advancing toward Riga in a coordinated assault that halted the Russian advance and inflicted heavy casualties. 1,100 hours. The battle for air superiority over the Baltics reached its climax as 400 NATO aircraft engaged 300 Russian fighters and bombers in the largest air battle since World War II. American F-22 Raptors, British Typhoons, French Rafales, and German Eurofighters combined their efforts in a coordinated campaign that would determine the outcome of the ground war. The technological superiority of NATO's aircraft became immediately apparent. Russian Su-57 stealth fighters, touted as equals to American F-22s, proved vulnerable to NATO's integrated air defense network. Advanced data linking between Allied aircraft allowed for coordinated attacks that overwhelmed Russian defensive systems. In the first 4 hours of air combat, NATO forces achieved a kill ratio of 3-to-1, shooting down 75 Russian aircraft while losing 25 of their own. The loss of air superiority forced Russian ground forces to operate without close air support, significantly reducing their offensive capability. 1,200 hours. The arrival of American B-1B Lancer bombers marked a turning point in the conflict. Flying from RAF Fairford in England, the supersonic bombers delivered devastating strikes against Russian armored columns using CBU-105 sensor-fused weapons, cluster bombs specifically designed to destroy tanks and armored vehicles. Each B-1B carried 30 CBU-105s, and each weapon could destroy multiple armored vehicles across a wide area. The psychological impact on Russian forces was enormous, as entire tank companies were eliminated in minutes by weapons they couldn't see or hear approaching. 1,300 hours. NATO's naval response demonstrated the alliance's overwhelming maritime superiority. The USS Harry S. Truman, accompanied by 2 Ticonderoga-class cruisers and 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, launched the first carrier-based strikes against Russian positions in Kaliningrad. 40 Fa-18EF Super Hornets, each carrying 4 AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles, systematically destroyed Russian air defense systems along the Baltic coast. The suppression of enemy air defenses, SEAD mission cleared the way for follow-up strikes by land-based aircraft. The Royal Navy's HMS Queen Elizabeth, operating with her escort group, launched simultaneous strikes using F-35B Lightning II fighters. The stealth capabilities of the F-35Bs allowed them to penetrate deep into Russian-controlled airspace, striking command centers and supply depots with precision-guided munitions. German and Danish naval forces established a naval blockade of Kaliningrad, preventing Russian reinforcements from arriving by sea. The Type 212A submarines of the German Navy proved particularly effective, sinking 3 Russian landing ships attempting to transport additional troops to the Baltic region. 1400 hours. The first major naval engagement occurred when Russian Project 22,350 frigates attempted to break the NATO blockade. The ensuing battle demonstrated the technological gap between Russian and NATO naval systems, with advanced NATO missiles achieving multiple hits while Russian defensive systems proved inadequate against coordinated attacks. 1500 hours. 18 hours after the invasion began, the tide of battle was turning decisively in NATO's favor. The arrival of the 82nd Airborne Division at Imari Air Base in Estonia provided crucial reinforcements to beleaguered Estonian forces, while the 173rd Airborne Brigade's combat drops behind Russian lines created chaos in enemy rear areas. The most significant development was the arrival of the first M1A2 Abrams tanks from the 1st Armored Division. Transported by C-5M Galaxy aircraft in an unprecedented airlift operation, 50 Abrams tanks were operational within 24 hours of the invasion's start. Their advanced armor and fire control systems proved superior to Russian T-90Ms in direct combat. Russian forces, initially confident in their numerical superiority, found themselves facing an enemy that grew stronger by the hour. NATO's logistics network, refined through decades of exercises and real-world operations, delivered reinforcements and supplies at a rate that Russian planners had not anticipated. 1600 hours. The first major Russian retreat began as forces advancing toward Tallinn came under attack from 3 directions. Estonian forces, reinforced by NATO troops and supported by American air power, launched a counterattack that pushed Russian forces back across the Narva River. Intelligence intercepts revealed growing panic in Russian command structures as the reality of NATO's response became clear. What Moscow had planned as a swift fait accompli was becoming a prolonged conflict against the world's most powerful military alliance. September 4th, 0430 hours. Exactly 48 hours after the invasion began, the strategic situation had reversed completely. Russian forces, initially advancing on all fronts, were now in full retreat along most of the front line. NATO's rapid response had not only halted the invasion but was beginning to push Russian forces back across international borders. The human cost was staggering. Russian casualties exceeded 15,000 killed and wounded, with over 300 tanks and 150 aircraft destroyed. NATO losses, while significant, were far lower: 3,200 casualties and 75 aircraft lost. The technological and training advantages of NATO forces had proven decisive. 0600 hours. The largest NATO ground offensive since World War II began as Operation Baltic Freedom launched. 150,000 NATO troops, supported by 800 tanks and 1,200 artillery pieces, attacked Russian positions across a 300-mile front. The objective was not just to repel the invasion, but to inflict such devastating losses that Russia would never again consider attacking NATO territory. The offensive's spearhead was the combined German-American armored force: 200 Leopard, 2 A-7 tanks, and 150 M1A2 Abrams advancing in coordinated formations that overwhelmed Russian defensive positions. Supporting them were French CAESAR, self-propelled howitzers, and British M270 multiple launch rocket systems that delivered precision fires against Russian command posts and supply lines. 0800 hours. As Russian forces faced complete defeat, the world held its breath for Moscow's response. Intelligence agencies detected increased activity at Russian nuclear facilities, and several ballistic missile submarines put to sea from their bases in the Arctic. President Putin's address to the Russian people at 1000 hours Moscow time was watched by billions worldwide. His message was defiant but revealed the desperation of Russia's position. The West seeks to destroy Russia, but we possess weapons that can defend our motherland. We will use all means necessary to protect Russian sovereignty. The nuclear threat cast a shadow over NATO's military success, but alliance leaders remained resolute. President Trump's response was measured but firm. Any use of nuclear weapons will result in consequences that Russia cannot imagine. We call on Moscow to end this unprovoked aggression and withdraw all forces to internationally recognized borders. 1,200 hours. The crisis deepened when Russian tactical nuclear weapons were detected moving toward the Baltic region. NATO's nuclear forces went to DEFCON 2 for the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, with B-52 bombers dispersing to multiple bases and Ohio-class submarines taking up launch positions. The world stood on the brink of nuclear war, but cooler heads ultimately prevailed. Back-channel communications between Moscow and Washington, mediated by China and India, began exploring options for de-escalation. September 5th, 0430 hours. 72 hours after the invasion began, Russian forces were in full retreat across all fronts. The last Russian troops crossed back into Russia at 0630 hours, ending the shortest major war in European history. The final tally was devastating for Russia. 25,000 casualties, 500 tanks destroyed, 200 aircraft shot down, and international isolation on a scale not seen since the Cold War. NATO had demonstrated that Article 5 was not merely a piece of paper, but a binding commitment backed by overwhelming military power. The geopolitical consequences were immediate and far-reaching. Finland and Sweden, previously neutral, applied for NATO membership within days. Ukraine's application was fast-tracked, and even traditionally neutral Switzerland began discussing closer ties with the alliance. 1,000 hours. President Putin's resignation was announced by the Kremlin, ending his 25-year rule over Russia. The failed invasion had not only been a military disaster, but had triggered a political crisis that ultimately brought down his government. The new Russian leadership, led by Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, immediately announced a ceasefire and began negotiations for a comprehensive peace settlement. The terms would be harsh: war reparations, arms limitations, and international monitoring of Russian military activities. The 72-hour war had changed Europe forever. NATO's rapid and decisive response had proven that the alliance remained the most powerful military force in history, capable of mobilizing overwhelming strength in defense of its members. For the Baltic states, the invasion had been traumatic but ultimately strengthening. The massive NATO presence that remained after the conflict provided unprecedented security guarantees, while reconstruction aid poured in from across the alliance. The war also demonstrated the evolution of modern warfare. The integration of air power, precision munitions, and rapid deployment capabilities had allowed NATO to achieve decisive victory in just 3 days. Traditional concepts of prolonged ground campaigns had been replaced by swift, technology-driven operations. 1,800 hours. As the sun set on September 5, 2025, Europe was at peace once again. But it was a different peace than had existed just 72 hours earlier. NATO had been tested and proven stronger than ever, while Russia faced an uncertain future under new leadership. The Baltic states, once again free and secure, began the process of rebuilding. But they would never forget the 72 hours when the world's most powerful alliance came to their defense, proving that an attack on one truly was an attack on all. The message to any future aggressor was clear. NATO's Article 5 was not just a treaty obligation, but a promise backed by the combined military might of 30 nations. The 72-hour war had demonstrated that this promise would be kept, no matter the cost. If you found this analysis compelling, don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth military coverage. Like this video to support the channel and share it so more people can understand how NATO's collective defense really works. The alliance has been tested and proven stronger than ever.